Today we're going to talk about one of the most important tools in public health. It's a concept that lets us measure the speed of a disease, how we figure out if we're dealing with a slow burn or an absolute wildfire.
So picture this. You're a public health detective, right? A brand new illness starts popping up in a community. People are getting sick. The number one question on your mind is, how fast is this thing moving? How do you even start to measure that?
Well, you can't just count up the total number of people who were sick. That doesn't really tell you anything about its momentum. What you truly need is something like a speedometer, a way to gauge how fast the disease is spreading, right now, in real time.
And that speedometer, it has a name. It's called the incidence rate. This is the key metric, the thing that tells us the velocity of a disease as it's moving through a population. So what is it exactly? Okay, the official definition sounds a little academic. The number of new cases of a disease that occur during a specified period of time in a population at risk for developing the disease. I know, it's a mouthful, but trust me, every single word in that definition is critical, and we're about to unpack it. So, to really get it, let's break that big definition down into its three essential ingredients. Think of it like a recipe. You get these three parts right, and you've got a crystal clear picture of what's going on. First up, we only count the new cases. Forget about who got sick last month or last year. Incidence is all about who just got diagnosed, the fresh cases, the ones happening right now.
Second, we have to define the population at risk. These are the folks who are actually susceptible to becoming a new case. So for a virus, for instance, it's basically everyone who isn't already immune.
And third, you have to set a time period. Just like speed is miles per hour, disease speed is new cases per week or month or year. Without that time frame, the number is pretty much meaningless. And this shows you exactly how those three ingredients come together in the actual formula. You take the number of new cases and put it on top. Then you take the number of people at risk and put it on the bottom. You divide them, and then you usually multiply it by a round number, like 1,000, just to make it easier to read. And voila, that's your incidence rate.
Now you might be thinking, okay, that makes sense, but isn't it just easier to count everyone who's currently sick? And that is a fantastic question, because it gets at the most common mix-up, and honestly, the most important distinction in this whole field.
The answer is a hard no. They tell two completely different stories, and this is the best way to remember it. Incidence is the movie. It shows you the flow, the action, the speed of new cases popping up over time. The other number, which is called prevalence, is just a snapshot, a single photo. It tells you how many people, new and old cases combined, have the disease at one specific moment.
And this flask analogy here is just perfect. Imagine the total amount of water in the flask. That's your prevalence, all the existing cases. The water being poured in from the top, that's your incidence, the new cases. And then you have water being drained out. Those are people who recover or, sadly, die. So that water level you see, the prevalence, it's this dynamic balance between the new cases flowing in and old cases flowing out.
Okay, so we get what incidence is, and we know it's not the same as prevalence. But so what? Why does it matter so much to track only the new cases? Why is this speedometer so vital? Well, here's the deal. Incidence is the measure of risk. If the incidence rate is high, it means there's a high risk that someone in that population could get the disease right now. It's how we spot an outbreak the moment it starts. And this is a big one. It's how we know if our prevention plans, like vaccines or health campaigns, are actually working. If the incidence rate starts to go down, we know we're doing something right.
Let's look at a real-world example. This chart shows the yearly incidence rates for two different cancers in men in the U.S. What this tells us is that the risk of a man getting a new case of prostate cancer in a given year is higher than his risk of getting a new case of lung cancer. It's not telling us how many men are living with cancer in total. It's telling us about the risk of a new diagnosis this year. And that kind of information is absolute gold for public health. By looking at these incidence rates, officials know exactly where to focus their resources. They know where to put money for research and where to aim prevention efforts. It basically turns guesswork into a smart, data-driven strategy.
And at the end of the day, it really comes down to this powerful idea. The incidence rate isn't just some number on a spreadsheet, it's the fundamental tool that scientists use to hunt for the causes of a disease. By tracking where and when new cases pop up, we can start to figure out the why.
So, there you have it. The incidence rate is the speedometer for public health. It measures risk, speed, the flow of new disease. But that leaves us with a pretty interesting question, doesn't it? If incidence is the speedometer, what other gauges do we need on the public health dashboard to get the full picture of a population's health?